Thank you for listening to the Ramble On Podcast Network. The following podcast was produced by members of the Highland Rambler from Highland High School in Salt Lake City, Utah.
Hey. I'm Malia Hansen. I'm a junior and I go to Highland. I'm Asian and Pacific Islander.
I'm Khatri. I'm a senior at Highland and I'm Nepali.
Welcome to our podcast about race and education, where we tell you about Highland diversity and its impact on community.
Every episode will feature a different community and a student from that community. Today we'll be talking about the Asian American community here at Highland.
Joining us today, we've got Melina.
Hello, I'm Melina. I'm a senior at Highland, and I am a Chinese adoptee, adopted by a Japanese family, and I'm happy to be here.
Woohoo!
Thanks for joining us. So our first question is, what is the Asian American community's place in Highland?
I mean, I haven't really felt the Asian community at Highland just because I haven't really seen that many Asian American kids or just Asian kids at Highland in general. So really the presence of the Asian community, I have not really felt. I think you two can also kind of relate to that.
Yeah, definitely.
Almost like nothing is mentioned about the Asian community at Highland, whether it be in the classroom or just discussions in general. I mean, I guess now because of the anti-Asian hate going around, I guess more discussions are coming up, but even then, it's kind of non-existent for me at school.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that, with the word non-existent. I've really met very few Asians during my time at Highland, and both of you are like 80% of the list. So
Oh, thank you. Yeah, same goes for me. Non-existent is a really good word. Yeah. Kind of adding on to that, how do you feel about the way that history is taught at Highland? Do you think there's Asian visibility in the curriculum itself?
I guess a little, but very sparse and very overgeneralized. Because definitely in American history, you don't really talk about the Asian community. It's usually American Revolution, Civil War, Great Depression, Civil Rights Movement, and then we're done. That's all there is. And then even in world history, I feel even though it's supposed to be world history, it's very focused on Europe and sort of the effects Europe had, and then America. So I think sort of the history of Asian American communities, and not just East Asians, but Southeast Asians, South Asians as well, especially South Asians and Southeast Asians, get nothing, almost nothing mentioned. So yeah, it's just, once again, non-existent, really.
That's so true. Cool. I remember whenever we covered the civil rights movement, I would always wonder where were Asians during this, because it's very black and white, and I always wondered where were we during this time.
And there was a big Asian movement with the civil rights, and not just with the Japanese or Chinese communities, but also with the Philippines, Filipinos, and that's never mentioned, even though it was a really big part also the civil rights movement. And I think just glossing over that, you just miss a whole entire narrative and picture of that time period. And instead, more focused on this black versus white kind of narrative, where really, America is a melting pot of different cultures.
Yeah,
definitely. Kind of moving on to our next question, what is damaging about that? What's damaging about the non-existent nature of it and stereotypes?
Just that people don't know then what Asian communities are. It's usually the stereotypical, then you get this small minority, you know, both of you are familiar with that myth continuing, because, you know, especially like in the media, you don't really see accurate representations of Asians. And that's what a lot of people, I guess, first look into Asian culture is here in America. And then that reflects in school when that's not, when, you know, that narrative is not discussed and saying like, hey, this is wrong, this is not accurate. And then people just aren't aware of that, especially, and I feel like that could be seen like 2 years ago with the musical, where you realize, yeah, I guess people don't realize how wrong some of these stereotypes are because we don't discuss them in school. And I think just not discussing it, not bringing up in conversation is, yeah, that's really damaging.
Yeah, for sure. And your whole experience with the musical, could you maybe talk about how that changed how you saw like how Highland's attitude towards, I guess, you know, Asian Americans?
Yeah, it really changed my attitude a little towards Highland, just seeing like, oh yeah, since there's not a big Asian like community at Highland, there's not a lot of backup, like, you know, backup from teachers or like the faculty, because like how many Asian students are there? You know, one Asian student in the entire musical, you know. So, and relating like that personal experience is really hard, especially, you know, since we already have very few BIPOC teachers at Highland, and like we don't even have an Asian American teacher, you know, and so just trying to relate that experience to someone is really hard, and just, yeah, getting the feelings and like someone understanding those, yeah, that's really hard. And not just for the musical, but like other stuff as well.
Yeah. Could you go back over like model minority theory? I mean, we've gone off about it before, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah. I think people might think that it's like, oh, such a positive stereotype, you know, because it's like, you're hardworking, your viewers hardworking. But it's like, it's a double-edged sword, because yeah, Asians are hardworking, but we're still seen as a minority, and therefore we can't reach like that same level as like white people do. And then, you know, like Asians are complacent, we're timid, we're quiet, we're glad to stay in our place, which is just not true, because, you know, lots of us are not happy where we want. But then when we try to bring up that argument, we're seeing it as this like aggressive person, when we're just like, I'm just expressing my opinion here, you know. But because of that like minority myth, it's like all of a sudden our like complaints or just expression of anything just becomes like a sort of more aggressive.
And I feel like white people really don't bring up Asian Americans that much ever. Like, we're pretty ignored. And it feels like the only time we are brought up is as a tool to deny the existence of systemic racism by saying, like, well, Asians are doing great, so why can't you? You know, that feels like the only time people really even talk about us.
Definitely. Just like, hey, look at them. They're smart.
They have money.
Yeah. And then look at you guys. So yeah.
Yeah. And I think that, to go back to like the stereotypes thing, it's really like the danger of painting all Asians as one thing.
Oh, yeah. Because, like, you know, I think a lot of people's, if they don't know like Asian culture as a whole, then they think like Asian, immediately thinking East Asian, because East Asian culture is the one that's being brought most to America. And therefore, you see like these Southeast Asians, Southeast Asians, South Asians, like all these different cultures and ethnicities, and all of a sudden they're just combined into one. Or people might even say, "Are you really Asian?"
Yeah.
Oh, I thought like you weren't Asian, and that's really damaging because yes, they are Asians. Yes, they have their own, culture and identity. Don't like mash them up all together.
Yeah. That reminds me of when someone said to me, "You're Asian? I thought you were Indian."
Yikes. Yikes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, how many people can probably point out on a map where Asian countries are the name of Asian countries?
Yeah.
Definitely. And that brings us back to the Asian American community being non-existent at Highland. We've come full circle. On that note, it's been about 10 minutes, so thank you for talking with us today, and it's been great to have you on.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed this.
All right. Thanks, everybody.